We got a little bit of rain happening here at the beach. But the rain is warm and it's still a great day. All right. Had a little bit of rain overnight as well. So today we'll be talking about generational wealth trust funds. We might get into asset protection trust funds. I don't know. But the focus is going to be the generational wealth trust funds that we utilize, which we utilize the most, how they work, and we've just had to change a couple. So, how those changes work. So, first thing first, trusts are governed by the jurisdiction in which they're created. Okay, so a trust in the U.S. is going to be different than a trust in Canada. It's going to be different than a Cook Islands trust. It's going to be different than a offshore generational wealth trust in Kenya, which is the jurisdiction that we use for generational wealth trusts. Why do we use Kenya as a jurisdiction for the generational wealth trust? Number one, in Kenya, anything that goes into the trust, anything granted into the trust, okay, or here they call it settling, which again depends on your jurisdiction. But anything granted into the trust is duty free, right? So there's no stamp duty tax on anything that you put into the trust. Okay, fine. That's great. So you can put things in the trust, tax exempt, no problem. All right, how about getting things out of the trust? Well, for each beneficiary, each year, the first 10 million Kenyan shillings that you pull out of the trust is also tax free. Okay, so it's a solid setup for generational wealth building. Now, that is not how Kenyan trusts work. That is how the specific type of Kenyan trust that we set up under the law works here in Kenya. So there's a very specific type of trust that we utilize when we're doing a generational wealth trust in Kenya that allows everything going into the trust to go in tax free and allows 10 million a year per beneficiary to come out tax free. Okay, so it's well equipped for generational wealth and succession purposes. All right, so that's why we use the Kenyan trust for generational wealth purposes. We typically do not use a Kenyan trust for asset protection purposes. We use different trusts for that. Okay, so it depends on what you're doing, which jurisdiction you're going to use. All right, so all of our generational wealth trusts, offshore generational wealth trusts, are in the Kenyan jurisdiction for those reasons, to benefit you. Now, moving forward from there, all of the trusts can be modified by the settler or by somebody who has authority to modify the trust, and that would be spelled out in the trust deed. Okay, so in the trust deed, it would say whether there is like an enforcer, and if that enforcer can modify the trust, whether it's the settler, which is the person putting stuff into the trust that doesn't necessarily need to be the person who created the trust, or whether it's the trust creator. Okay, and whether it can still be modified after that person dies. Okay, so trusts are set up that after that initial person dies, the trust can't be modified anymore. Okay, so if a problem arises that needs modification, essentially what you need to do is whoever is the beneficiary needs to open a new trust. Okay, and then they can pull their benefit out of the old trust and plug it into the new trust. The other way to do it, which is the way that we typically do it, is you can have a clause that allows for legal continuity. All right, so what does that mean? That means if something the trust is doing becomes illegal later, right? So if they're saying, like, for example, you know, that they'll pay 100% of the education fees for the beneficiaries, right? So if you're a beneficiary of the trust and you go to college or trade school or whatever, the trust will pay your school fees 100%, okay? Which is actually a pretty common clause. Let's say that it becomes free public, universities. There's no such thing as a private university. Doesn't matter what school you go to, it's paid, right? Actually, similar to the way it is in Israel. If that becomes the rule, then it's now irrelevant that the trust deed requires the trust to pay for school because now you can't, right? Not necessarily that it's illegal, there's just no mechanism to do it. So in that situation, the continuity clause would kick in, and the trustee would write a paragraph or whatever, cite the law, cite what's going on. Okay, now we have free universal education. We couldn't pay for education if we wanted to. There's no mechanism by which to do so, but it's a requirement of the trust, right? So at that point, the trustee would be able to create an amendment, have the beneficiary sign the amendment, and then remove that requirement from the trust. If the universal education, thing were to fall apart later on, in government, and paid schooling were to come back, then that amendment would also come back, right? So if the trust is doing something, and that thing can be, benign, it doesn't, have to be something crazy, but if the trust is doing something and just the world changes where there's no longer a mechanism by which to do that thing, then you could be stuck if you didn't have a continuity article in there. If you had a continuity article in there, then that continuity article would allow you to amend the trust, even though it's, irrevocable. It would allow you to amend it to maintain continuity with current law, right? So that's one of the amendments that is typically pretty important to have, just to make sure that we can change what we need to change in the future to keep the trust compliant. All right. And there might be something like that. There might be an actual compliancy measure that the trust does not grant the trustee the right to do. Right. So the government might say, listen, we now require you to file X, Y, and Z, every year about the beneficiaries or something like that. Right. Which is not a current requirement. And there may be a privacy clause in the trust where the trustee is not allowed to give out a list of who the beneficiaries are, right? That's also very common. So if the law changes where the law is like you have to give out a list of who the beneficiaries are, hey, what's up, Robert? And the trust specifically says, as a matter of privacy, you cannot give out a list of who the beneficiaries are, then what, right? You're not going to let the trust get dissolved because it's no longer in legal compliance, and it's like an illegal trust now, right? So there has to be a mechanism in there where, in order to keep with continuity of the law, we now have to scrap or redesign the privacy clause to align, with the legalities of the jurisdiction, right? So it's important that that mechanism is in there, because if it's not in there, then the trustee literally has to keep operating against the law until a judge comes in and breaks your trust, which is crazy, because at that point your trust got some money in it. By the time like you're no longer around and the laws change, your trust got some bank in it. All right, it's been compounding for quite a while at that point. All right, so these mechanisms are important. There are mechanisms that people always miss when they try to do it themselves, because they don't have the experience to understand that 100 years after they die, these things are more than likely going to change, right? The rules are more than likely going to change. The laws are more than likely going to change. Even tax rates are more than likely going to change, and possibly even the way tax is done is going to change. So there needs to be continuity clauses that keep certain things the same no matter what, or charges the trustee to find a way to get as close to what the originator of the trust wanted, or to just wipe certain things out after certain milestones have been met, right? Like there are certain trusts that that spell out what type of philanthropy they're going to do, right? Other trusts are just like, yeah, we're just going to do 5% charity, every year, whatever, right? But there are other trusts that spell it out. And typically in those trusts, something has happened in the family, right? So you'll see trusts that say, no, 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 we're going to give 5% to breast cancer every year. Well, typically somebody was affected by breast cancer in that family. Somebody died, some grandma, some whatever. And so now there's a focus on breast cancer or diabetes or whatever, right? We see that all the time. So when we see that, as professionals, it's our job to then tell them, hey, listen, one day that thing won't exist. What happens then, right? What do we do when the thing doesn't exist? Which is something that people really don't consider. So what happens when we cure breast cancer in 100 years? Now what, right? Because you have an order in this trust that we got to give 5% of our net, whether it's receipts, proceeds, profits, whatever the case might be. But whatever you put in that trust deed, 5% of it has to now go to breast cancer research. Well, what happens when breast cancer is solved and there is no more research? We figured it out. Now what? Right? So all of those questions have to be answered, or else you're going to run into a situation where your trust grinds to a halt because it's non-compliant and there's no way to make it compliant. All right. Okay. Yeah, it's just an example, smooth criminal. All right. Yeah, I'm not making a prediction on whether or not breast cancer will be cured in 100 years. All right, so that's how continuity amendments work. All right, so that's one of the most important amendments that's going to be in the document. All right, moving on from the continuity amendment, you're going to want an article in there on amendments, period. Right? Typically, what you're going to want is you're going to want it to be irrevocable at the death of the originator. So as soon as the originator dies, you want it to essentially lock down and be, irrevocable at that point. And then those continuity articles kick in, right? Prior to that, though, typically you'll want the originator or some representative thereof. So it could be the enforcer. There's a position called trust enforcer, which is like an independent third party who can just step in and be like, the trustee's not doing what they're supposed to be doing, so I'm going to remove them, right? It can be the trustee, of course. There can be a vote amongst the beneficiaries, so you can set it up multiple different ways, right? But you're going to want that initially there's room for change because things change and happen all the time. So, for example, we have a client. This just happened yesterday, actually, so it's pretty fresh. But we had a client that set up generational wealth trust and named their I think it was their nephew. They have no kids, so they named their nephew. They have no kids and they're like past the point of having kids, right? So they named their nephew the sole beneficiary, and then they came back and they were like, all right, you know what? I want to run a couple of Airbnbs, so I'm going to buy a duplex, have a duplex constructed. The duplex is going to be owned by a limited company, so kind of the equivalent of an LLC, and the trust is going to own the LLC. And now we're going to shift things to where the trustee is the corporate trustee, so it's a trustee company, right? And the beneficiary is the client now, right? So in their trust deed, there was an article of amendment, Article 8 to be specific, in their trust deed was the amendment article. And it says that during the life of the originator, which is her, she can amend the trust essentially any way she wants, right? So she was able to go in there and pull out the trustee, that was her, and move herself from trustee to beneficiary, and get rid of the nephew, right? And then move forward from there, right? So and then she's working with her CPA. He's actually a CPA JD, so he's a tax attorney in the U.S. as to how that money is going to move back to her in the U.S. And without a huge tax burden popping up and all that stuff, right? So she was able to make the trust non-grantor and move forward in that direction, which is great as far as reporting requirements are concerned, because of two things. The first thing is she had an article of amendment. If there was no article of amendment, she'd be up shit creek, right? Trying to change that trust like that. Number two is that she had not funded the trust yet. If the trust is unfunded, it almost doesn't exist. Okay. So when you initially create the trust, if the trust is unfunded, it almost doesn't exist. And it definitely depends on the jurisdiction you're operating in, right? So in the jurisdiction that we're operating in, it doesn't exist. Until it's funded, it's nothing, right? So it can be changed, it can be modified, it can be all of that up until there's something of value inside of it. And then it's locked down based on whatever the trust deed says, all right? So that's the kind of setup. The kind of setup that she set up is the same kind of setup that we use typically for bond laddering, right? So the bonds might be owned by the trust. The trust can pay out to beneficiaries tax exempt, remember? So there's no tax hit to being paid out by the trust on this side. And then you have to have, if it's an offshore and you're dealing with another country, then you got to get that figured out locally. All right. But you got up to 10 million coming out tax free per beneficiary per year. So the trust is then kicking out whatever money needs to be kicked out. And then it might be kicking it out to a company, and that company might be managing like your actual estate, right? Like your home, like the physical real estate. So that's typically how those things are set up. Now, on the generational wealth side, you don't have to do all that. You can just have the trust own the bond ladder, and the trustee will keep on reinvesting the dividends, maybe holding a certain percentage in principal if you have that in the trust deed, and then that'll be the compounding for the generational wealth. All right. So if you're not utilizing it and it's not a personal trust vehicle and it's actually a generational wealth trust vehicle, then you can have that bond ladder in there and have that trust take that money that you would have been living off of had it been a personal vehicle and reinvesting it every single month, right? And then it becomes a generational wealth vehicle. A generational wealth vehicle, by the way, that moves incredibly quickly, right? Because the clients that come in and do like a generational wealth trust and they make one payment, into that trust, and then they let that one payment compound for 6 years until their grandkids get it, right? They still end up with $1 million in the trust and they're not adding money to it. For the folks that come in and waterfall the bonds with the bond ladder, they're getting payments into the trust every single month. So there's at least 12 payments going into the trust every month coming off of the bonds. So just think about that scenario. They got 10 years or whatever of payments coming in every month versus the other person who put $3,000 in once and then let the interest on that $3,000 compound. You got another $500 a month coming in every month without doing anything. It's all passive. So the sovereign debt, the government treasuries are paying in $500 a month, $500 a month, $500 a month, 12 times a year for the next 10 years, right? Now that number might go down because they amortize a lot of the bonds. So the 500 might turn into 300 and then 200, whatever, but it doesn't matter. The fact is that you keep adding money to that trust as it's compounding over the years. So what eventually ends up happening is it gets to that same dollar amount way faster than the person who just set it and forget it. All right, makes sense. Now that's only for people who are doing offshore generational wealth trusts and they're not, living there. because typically the people who are living there are going to live off of, that money that's coming out of the bonds every month. So if they're getting that 50,000 Kenyan shillings a month, they're living off of that, when they're waterfalling it and they're moving here. If they're not moving here and they're just setting up a generational wealth trust for their kids or their grandkids, then they don't have to worry about that. All right. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right. Next. Hold on. All right. So most of these comments are just nonsense. Okay. All right. So, the next clause that we want to make sure is in there, is any kind of, what do we call it? We call it beneficiary continuity, but that doesn't mean anything to you. So, um, it's if the path of the family changes, right? So the continuity clauses were legal continuity, right? Beneficiary continuity is if the beneficiaries come together and there's a non-material change, which typically comes out of some sort of material change to the family. So non-material to the trust, right? So like, for example, if the trust is like, hey, we pay school fees, 100% of the school fees, that's material to the trust. So the beneficiaries wouldn't pop up and be like, oh, you know what? We don't want the school fees paid anymore. Stop paying the school fees and pay us directly, right? Like just give us the money. You can't do that, right? But unless the trust says you can. But you can turn around and say, all right, listen, this trust only provides for collegiate school fees, right? Which we always try to talk people out of. But let's say that's what's in the trust. But we want to go to trade school, right? So now the change is within the spirit of the trust. The originator just didn't think far enough ahead to think, well, wait a minute. College isn't for everybody. What if I have a beneficiary who wants to be a master plumber or a master electrician or an HVAC tech? Like, I'm not going to pay for their trade school because they didn't go to college. That's not what I want, right? But they just didn't have a professional to have that conversation with them. So when they made the trust, it says what it says, right? But within the spirit of what it says, is this other thing maybe? The person's, at this point, if you're having this conversation, the originator is dead, right? So, you're just guessing. So then all the beneficiaries would have to come together and unanimously agree, like, yeah, this should be expanded to trade school as well, and maybe even apprenticeships, if it's the kind of trade that has an apprenticeship and not a trade school or college, right? And then that would be built out, and then everybody would sign off on it. So the trustees would sign off on it, the beneficiaries would sign off on it, and if there's a trust protector, they would sign off on it, and if there's a trust enforcer, they would sign off on it, right? So everybody involved signs off on those kind of changes, but those kind of changes are only even allowable if there's an article that says they are, right? You have to cover everything within the trust, which is why if it's an irrevocable trust or an offshore trust, you got to use a professional. If it's a revocable domestic trust, you can play with it if you want because you can just revoke it at any time. But outside of that, you got to use a professional who knows which questions to ask you. And who can see the gaps in what you're planning, right? Okay. The next clause that is pretty typical is it's either a bloodline clause or a descendancy clause, right? The difference is with a bloodline clause, the beneficiaries have to be related to the originator or originators by blood. So a DNA test is typically done, not a paternity test, a DNA test is typically done at birth. Okay, and then as long as that descendant matches, the progenitors, they're fine. Okay, they're in. Now, a descendancy clause is different because you can be an adopted descendant, right? If it's a bloodline clause and you're adopted, you are not in the trust. Doesn't mean you're not in the family, but you are not in the trust. If it's a descendancy clause and you're adopted, then you may be in the trust, right? There are strengths and weaknesses to both. So in the descendancy clause, that might include spouses. And if a spouse gets in and then there's a divorce, then what? That would have to be covered in the trust, how you deal with that, right? In the bloodline clause, it would absolutely not include spouses. It might include their children, but it would not include them, right? So there's a certain level of protection there versus the other way around. And there's a certain level of, you know, additional clauses that have to be written in to figure out what do you do with X, Y, and Z if spouses just kind of get popped in every time they marry one of the trust members versus if the only way you can become a member of the trust or a beneficiary of the trust is to be directly related to the person who started the trust, right? So most of our clients do bloodline, right? So if they adopt somebody, if their kids adopt a kid, those kids they're not part of that trust, right? Now, I myself have a bloodline clause, but you can have a family endowment. Okay, so a family endowment will take care of certain things for anyone in the family, and it's very specific and it's very restricted, right? So it's like a miniature trust, but it doesn't do a lot. The family endowment just pays for school. So if my family endowment, that's not what a family endowment does. A family endowment can do anything, but my family endowment just pays for school. So if you're adopted, if you're a stepchild, something like that, the family endowment would still cover education. Okay. Beyond that, though, they're not part of my trust. That does not mean that their parents, guardians, whoever can't create a new trust, and that those people being part of my trust can take whatever they get distributed from my trust and put it into their new trust, which includes this new group of people. So the evolution of the family branches and how the trust is going to work in those family branches can start including new people. All right. So that's the bloodline clause versus the hereditary clause. Okay. You can also just declare who the beneficiaries are, right? And then once those beneficiaries are done, the trust might die, right? So if you simply declare this person and this person are the beneficiaries, okay, cool. Now they're dead. Now what? Right? So if there are no instructions in the trust as to what would happen at that point, the trust itself might die. All right, because there's no beneficiaries left and there's no instructions, then the trust is gone. And in those situations, typically it's the same thing as like somebody dies without a will type of thing. Like essentially the government's just gonna swoop in and take everything you got. Right? So what we typically do is we'll set up a clause that will turn the trust into an endowment upon upon a situation where there are no further beneficiaries, and there's normally a sleeping period, right? So what'll happen is there'll be no beneficiaries. There'll be like a post in like the legal gazette or whatever. And then you can put in the trust like, okay, not only does there have to be a post in the jurisdiction, obviously, but the family is from wherever, right? The family is from Louisiana, or the family is from Clark County, Nevada, or whatever. So a post needs to be made in, the newspaper there as well, calling for any descendants of whoever, right? Descendants of John Smith. Please contact such and such a law firm, right? And then so there would be a time period, and sometimes that time period is significant, right? Because there's nobody else that needs to benefit, so why not be significant, right? So in case, let's say, the descendant is 5 years old, and and can't respond to that yet. So a lot of these time periods are like 20 years, right? Like so for the next 20 years, every year there's going to be this ad that goes out, and the money inside the trust is going to pay for that. And then at the 21st year, if nobody has responded to any of those ads and been verified, people are going to respond, but been verified to be true, then the entire trust would then convert into either a foundation, an private operating foundation, a charity, any of those things, right? And then pay out to whatever it is that the originator decides is going to be their charitable purpose, or whatever else it turns into, right? It can turn into a company, you know. We've seen that as well, where it turns into a company that works on a certain thing. And again, that's for people that typically have some kind of focus on like we had a guy who set up a really really nice trust. He's a rheumatologist, and both of his parents suffered of rheumatoid arthritis. So there's a lot of caveats in his trust that allow for the trust to be heavily involved in rheumatoid arthritis research, and stuff like that. So it's whatever that your family is into. Trust can be tailored to that thing. But the point is that you need to be able to look ahead to anything that could happen, anything that could go wrong, and cover that within the trust, right? We had somebody who had a trust, that they had to have a judge essentially go in and pierce the trust and get rid of it, because the trust was designed to make a payment to the beneficiaries, which were their kids. They had 4 or 5 of them. And one of the kids got strung out on heroin, and they had never even considered that. So in the trust, there was no mechanism to stop giving the kid who was taking the money and spending it on heroin more money. So they were funding his heroin addiction, and they couldn't stop it. So they had to get a judge to intervene and destroy the trust essentially and make a new one, which was very expensive and very time consuming, and put the kid at risk. The kid could have OD'd during that process. Whereas in the new trust, of course, they have a whole, contingency plan for if that happens, and putting that person in rehab and cutting off the money and blah, 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 blah. But if you don't think about it, when it happens, your trust can't solve it, right? Hey, Roland, good evening. How are you? It does kind of look like evening, huh? It was raining this morning, so it's a little darker than usual. All right. So trust stuff is super boring. It's all planning and legalese. It's not as exciting as building a house and all of that, but it's super important, because we get tons of people who come in here, and by the time they get to our firm, they've tried to do something on their own, and now they have something registered that's irrevocable, that has all kind of craziness in it, no contingencies, no way for the trustees to navigate, and they've already put something inside of it. At that point, that thing is damn near lost. Like whatever it is that you gifted to that trust is damn near lost at that point. It's going to take years, and a lot of court to get it out if you screwed it up. So don't play around with irrevocable trusts thinking you're going to figure it out, as you go. Even lawyers coming out of law school don't know how to make an irrevocable trust. They learn at their law firm. So they watch a more senior lawyer or a senior partner or something like that make the trust, and they learn little by little over years before they can do it themselves. So even law school doesn't prepare someone for drafting a legitimate irrevocable trust. So don't think that Chat GPT is going to help you. It's not. Right. So don't play with irrevocable trust. If you want to play, I know there's a lot of people that are like that. They want to like get their fingers in it, whatever. You want to play with trust, make sure it's a domestic revocable, and then you can just turn it off at any time. Right. Typically, you don't get any kind of tax hit on that. It's kind of like a pass through because you're the trustee and the beneficiary and all of that. But there's also no asset protection to that. But if you have assets that need protecting, then you have the money to hire a professional, right? So doesn't really matter that there's no asset protection for that. It's also really, really helpful for inheritance, right? Even though there's no asset protection, the trust will still skip probate. Okay. Which is actually, even though that's the terminology that's used often in the industry, it's actually misleading. Probate happens anyway. You're just not subject to it, right? The court doesn't make a decision on those things because those things are owned by the trust. So don't think that like probate magically disappears. You're just not subject to it with the things that are in that trust. In most jurisdictions, I guess there could be a jurisdiction out there where it does disappear. We've never encountered it though. Well, that's an interesting question. Should you keep making payments to a generational wealth trust to accelerate compounding? That's going to be a question that you have to answer with your accountant, right? Because if you keep making payments from the United States, then it's going to fail the control test. And if it fails the control test, then the IRS is going to say this is a grantor trust. And if the IRS says this is a grantor trust, then you now have to do all sorts of filings to the IRS on that trust or face penalties, right? If you go through, a firm and you set up that trust. So now the trust is set up. And in the setting up of that trust, the trust itself acquires domestic sovereign debt, which is offshore to you. For you, it's offshore foreign sovereign debt. And that sovereign debt doesn't come back to you. And you can't touch the trust anymore. Can you pass a control test? More than likely, yes, because you don't control it. You can't touch it. You're not putting money into it. You're not the beneficiary. The grandkids are the beneficiary. And even if you are the beneficiary, it still passes the control test, right? So what is it now? It can be non-grantor. What does that mean? That means that until a distribution comes out of the trust to a U.S. citizen, the IRS doesn't care about it. They don't want to know about it. None of that. All right. So if you want to understand more about that, go to irs.gov. There's a little search bar up in the corner. Type in non-grantor trust. See what the IRS has to say about it. All right. So if it's non-grantor, you're not going to have a tax compliance issue with the trust. But depending on your situation at home, you might not care about the compliance issue. You might go ahead and go through the compliance, right? The different people have vastly different tax situations and financial situations. And so for some people, having a grantor trust is okay. And doing all that extra paperwork and declaring all the bank accounts and all that is fine based on what it is that they got going on, right? For other people, it's just a hassle, right? Especially if you're leaving a generational wealth trust there and it's just compounding for the next 60 years. Like it ain't paying nobody nothing, right? It's just sitting there making money for the next 60 years until it starts paying your grandkids something. Then what's the point of you making filings every single year for the rest of your life for something that ain't benefiting you immediately or your kids immediately or even your grandkids immediately? It's not going to do anything for the next, 30 years or 60 years or however many years you set it up for. What's the point of all the extra paperwork, right? So that's going to be a question that you have to ask your tax professional based on your situation. What makes more sense? Should you keep it non-grantor and not have to worry about all of those tax filings on all those extra IRS forms, or should you go grantor and do that anyway? And typically, if you go grantor, there are some other structures you have in place. Like if you have a C corporation, there might be a legitimate reason for you to go grantor, right? Researching businesses to start in Kenya. I have a safety background. Considering a life safety. Considering a life safety. See some dots there. Maybe you're still typing. Let me give you a minute. Like what? Like okay, for with the C corp thing, like what? Like the foreign dividends received deduction, right? So if a C corp, if an American C corp owns 10% of a foreign company and holds those shares for at least 365 days, so there's some strategy on when you transfer the shares to the C corp. At the end of the 165 days of holding those shares, if dividends are paid to the C corp, they can get a 100% tax deduction on those dividends, right? So they can essentially get those dividends tax exempt, right? So if that's the case, do you want a non-grantor offshore trust if the dividends are coming from the trust corporation, right? From the incorporated trust, not the trustee corporation, the incorporated trust. If the trust is kicking out a distribution as a dividend, since it's also incorporated to your C corp, and your C corp owns the trust, if that's the way that you've set it up with your CPA, and now you're going to get tax-free money from the trust because of the foreign dividends received deduction, and because of the nature of the trust in the jurisdiction, the distributions from the trust on this side are also tax exempt. So you've just figured out a tax exempt circle, right? Well, now maybe it does make sense to have a grantor trust, right? So it just depends on what's going on. Safety compliance issue. Wait, consulting businesses and auditing large high-rise apartments, businesses and fire and safety compliance issues. I don't know. You need a feasibility study. My knee-jerk reaction is they're not going to be open to it, and I'm not certain how the Kenyan version of OSHA operates, and I'm not sure what the Kenyan version of OSHA is, honestly, to tell you the truth. So, you need a feasibility study. I've never. I'm trying to think. I've never even seen a compliance officer or stuff like that. So I'm not sure if they take that seriously. So that might be the worst business you could possibly create here. But then again, it might not. You definitely just need a feasibility study done, and see what they say. But for that one, sorry, I can't really give any advice on that one. I've never seen someone in that business, and we've built some pretty big things, and I've never had someone like that show up, right? So there's NEMA, which is like PA, they show up. Who else shows up? There's NEMA, there's county, but county only shows up to make sure that like the construction matches the plans that you submitted for your like getting your permit. There's like, and then the county like structural architect is part of that approval process. So they don't actually show up; they just judge the structural drawing. So you got NEMA. What else is there? There's another organization that shows up, but it's not like OSHA. So I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing out here. That might have to be something that you start. So it might have to be like this would be fire suppression system. Again, get a feasibility study. Because to the best of my knowledge, you don't even need like a fire alarm here. You know what I mean? You definitely don't need a carbon monoxide. But most of the houses, when they're built now, we do because we build to American standards. So that's another kind of bonus of building with us, constructing with us. But but we wouldn't have to, you know what I mean? So, like the apartment building that we utilize for some of our people who are waiting for their houses to be built, we didn't build that, right? So we just, we just have a deal with the apartment complex. So there are no fire alarms in that building. There are no carbon monoxide alarms in that building. There aren't even fire extinguishers in the building, right? And that building has an occupancy permit. So like the government came out, did their inspection, and issued a permit. Right? So it's not the same. That doesn't mean that your idea isn't valid. I would just get if that's one of those ideas that I would get a feasibility study on. Yeah, no, it is definitely. I noticed it right away. I noticed it right, and even like when we were building, I was like, all right, so we got to put, uh, a carbon monoxide detector and a fire detector in each room, and like had an issue finding them at first because they're just not standard. So we went to like the regular hardware store, and they were like, "What do you need 12 of them for?" Like what? So there are 12 rooms in the house. It's 4 bedrooms. There's 12 rooms in the house. What do you mean? So it's just one of those things that they're like they're not there. But on the flip side, their houses don't like burn down like our houses do because they're fully stone and concrete. And for example, the cinder blocks that we use are actually made of like essentially like prehistoric coral. Like there are coral quarries where old ancient coral from when this entire place was underwater, I'm assuming millions of years ago, are up in the top of the mountains now. And so there are quarries where you get this coral stone out, and it's actually stronger than cinder block. So our cinder block construction here at the coast utilizes that coral, and then it's all concrete and micro cement and all of that stuff. So fires happen. Like there was just a fire, not in any of our places because we have detectors and fire extinguishers, but there was just a fire at a beach, estate like 2 months ago. Right, you can actually look it up here on TikTok. You fire in Deaney Beach, you'll see the fire. The structures are all there. Like none of the structures fell down because it's not made out of wood, right? So all of the structures are there, and they had what's called the Makuti roof, which is probably what started the fire. We don't use Makuti roofs, but the Makuti roof was like bamboo. So the bamboo roof went up, and then all of the roofs close to it went up, right? But the concrete structure is still there. So in their mind, it's like, oh, the houses don't burn down. Just the stuff inside of them burns. And so I guess that's the mentality. But yeah, it is pretty interesting. It's wild. And even those people, they didn't have no fire detector, and that's not an issue. Like there's not like an investigation. Why wasn't there a fire detector, a smoke alarm, a carbon monoxide detector? So yeah, it's interesting. So I don't know, man. Do a feasibility study on that. Maybe in the big cities, there's like city ordinances. So like maybe in Nairobi, you have to like have certain things in place because all the houses are so close to each other. But it definitely wouldn't be like a national thing, I don't think. But a feasibility study would definitely tell you that. Oh, you were in Indiana, you saw that. Yeah, man. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Wildfire. But it was that Makuti roof thing. We never use Makuti roofs. We always use, actually, we always use hidden roofs like that. So it's like a flat cement roof. It has a drain on the side, and so we never do the Makuti roof. A lot of people, especially like Airbnb people, they get it for like the charm. So like you show up to their Airbnb and it looks like a hut, because it has this bamboo thatch roof. We just don't go for that. That brings up a good point, though. I mean, a lot of people just kind of jump with no feasibility study. A lot of people are married to their business ideas. Very, very, very bad decision, right? You have to be able to sell a company at any time. It has to always be for sale. And you have to be able to walk away from a company that is not working or an idea that's not working, right? And so a lot of people are so enamored with their idea that they're afraid to do a feasibility study because they're afraid to hear that their idea is bullshit. And we live in like the participation trophy era where everybody thinks they can just manifest whatever the hell they want, which is wild. Because obviously just taking a look at the world that doesn't work, but it makes them feel good to say it. So a lot of people end up burning all of their money in something that absolutely wouldn't work. You know what I mean? But if you do the feasibility study, not necessarily the market analysis, because that's different. But if you do a feasibility study, it'll actually tell you how feasible the business is inside of that market, how feasible it is based on like a legal compliance, like what legal compliance exists in that market. It'll let you know how much money there is to be made in that market, and so on and so forth. So very, very different, because a market analysis is just going to tell you whether or not the market is essentially open to business, right? So the market analysis is going to tell you how young are the people, in the country, how much money is flowing, through the country, what's the debt, ratios in the country, how many people are in the middle class and stuff like that. You're analyzing the market instead of analyzing your idea. The feasibility study is how feasible is your business idea in this place. The market analysis is let's take a look at the market and see what it looks like, right? So I wouldn't get a market analysis, but definitely a feasibility study and just see what they say. And you can get a basic, like, high level feasibility study. Like, they don't need to be doing freaking what they do at the in-depth feasibility study. They don't need to be doing like polls and focus groups and like all of that stuff. Like, you don't need to pay for all of that. You can just do a high level feasibility study where they'll look for competitors. They'll look at how much money the competitors are making. They'll look at the law and see if the law requires what you're talking about. And then if it doesn't require what you're talking about, they'll look to see like how feasible is it that people will engage in something that's not required by law as an additional like kind of cost, and all of that. And then they'll look at the opportunity cost as well. So a lot of times with the feasibility study, there are parallel businesses that are actually more feasible than the business you're talking about, but they're connected in some way. And then it might set off a light bulb like, oh, all right, I'll just do that. So typically worth it. Like if you're serious about doing business and you're going to do business no matter what, you just need to find the right business to do, then they're typically worth it. Yeah, man, no problem. You're definitely welcome. Oh, yes, we were talking about trust, weren't we? So, yeah, the trust is a corporation. Here, that's this jurisdiction, right? That's not every jurisdiction, okay? Like you can do a trust in the UK at the Isle of Wight. That trust is not a corporation, right? It can be incorporated. I'm sure there's probably a method to incorporate it, but generally that trust would not be a corporation, right? So you're able to work with the different jurisdictions. So we like left Philly. We decided to start doing our thing here in Kenya because of the tax-free nature of the generational wealth trust. So because it gives out 10 million a year tax free, and anything you put into it is tax free, it ends up being a solid trust for generational wealth, and that type of planning. For asset protection, we don't use this jurisdiction. For asset protection, we use Mauritius sometimes. Sometimes we use the Seychelles because it has a 0% corporate tax rate. If you set up a Seychelles IBC, right, which is a special type of company that is not allowed to operate within the country that it's registered and formed, right? So you form it in the Seychelles. Seychelles law says as long as you don't do business in the Seychelles, your corporate tax rate is now 0%, right? So why? Why would you do that? So, for example, we have a client that here at the beach, in Kenya, in another town up the beach called Malindi, they have a beach resort, but their booking company is in the Seychelles. So the booking company in the Seychelles takes all the international bookings, right? So when you book online, it goes to this company in the Seychelles, does all the international bookings. It blocks any Seychelles IP addresses because you can't do business with the Seychelles, right? So all of the money for all the international bookings is tax free, whereas it would be like 30 something percent, corporate tax if they ran it through domestically, right? So that's one of the reasons why you would do the offshore IBC, have that 0% tax rate. Any local people booking at the hotel, obviously, you would have to pay the local taxes on that, but all the international bookings would be going through the booking company, right? So it's almost like a management company, but specifically for hotel bookings, right? So things like that is why, people, look at those different jurisdictions as far as offshore structuring is concerned as a greater strategy. So you always want to make sure that you key in whoever your local CPA is and your local legal team is. You make sure that they're on board because they're going to have to plan everything on that side for compliance. We plan everything on this side for compliance. We have our own law firm here, so we're vertically integrated with legal and tax compliance, as well as we have our own architects, our own general contractor for when we relocate people and they need a place to live, then we build them that place to live, right? So that's how that works overall. Hopefully that answered your question there, Chief. How do they make money with the 0% corporate tax rate? Oh yeah, so there's an annual. You have to do your annual renewals. They're not particularly expensive, but that's something. The other thing is they're hoping that you set up at least one of your bank accounts in country, right? So a GDP is, and this is a very high level simplification, right? But GDP is essentially measured by the same unit of currency, the same dollar, the same real, whatever the unit of currency is, entering and exiting the bank multiple times. But the same one, not just how many dollars go in and how many dollars come out, the same dollar goes into the bank and then gets loaned out and then gets paid back and then gets loaned out. And that same dollar moving back and forth, into the bank, out of the bank, into the bank, out of the bank. That's essentially how GDP is measured, right? So if you have a bunch of corporations that are making a bunch of money and they get to keep more money because they're operating out of these IBCs that have a 0% corporate tax rate, then there's a bunch of money in their banking system that's moving back and forth, right? So that's good for their GDP. So not everything has to be base level transactional. There are sometimes strategic transactions where you can set up things like these IBCs and so on and so forth. Mauritius has what they call a GBC. It's essentially the same thing by a different name. IBC is International Business Company or Corporation. A GBC is a global business company or corporation, right? So, virtually the same thing, but the Mauritius has a tax rate that's just below 2%, right? It's 1 point something percent. So there is some taxes to be paid on the Mauritius side. So typically, Mauritius isn't as friendly unless you have like 10 million in assets or more, right? If you have 10 million or more in assets that are going into that trust and the trust is going to own the GBC or whatever, then it might make a lot of sense to do that. But again, if those assets are U.S. assets, and the person is a U.S. person, by putting U.S. assets into that offshore trust, that might eliminate the non-grantor status. So that might automatically be a grantor trust because you put U.S. assets into it. There are ways to make it non-grantor anyway. It'll probably be challenged, so you have to make sure you have all your ducks in a row so you can prove, the control test and all of that stuff. But you would still have to make at least one filing when you put the U.S. assets into the trust. There's an IRS filing you have to do for that, right? So even if you do that IRS filing and then you prove that it is, yes, a grantor trust, and then it maintains grantor status moving forward, the government knows that trust exists, and it knows where the bank accounts are, and it knows all of that stuff, right? So that can work for people. There's plenty of people that absolutely works for, right? Most of those people already have a boatload of money, but there's plenty of people that can absolutely work for. But you just got to make sure with your professionals whether or not that works for you. And TikTok is challenging me as always. All right, sorry about that. TikTok always sends me a puzzle to fill out. I guess it thinks that these are like recorded or something, so it always challenges me to fill out this puzzle. All right. Does that answer your question, number one? And then, are there any other questions? The Caribbean. Um, Not yet. We are, however, going to probably open up a branch slash office in Grenada. So, from like a Pan African perspective, I guess a lot of people are always like, "Oh, you're doing stuff in Africa, so you do stuff in the Caribbean." The actual functional perspective, however, is the Caribbean is challenging. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but it's challenging because they're all islands, right? So that means that in most of those islands, everything is imported. We run into the same thing with like Seychelles and Mauritius, right? They're islands. Now Mauritius is self-sufficient. It's the only African country actually that's completely self-sufficient. They don't need anything from anyone. But they're islands, right? So like for example, we were doing something in Grenada. I don't even remember what we were doing, but while we were there, we were asked to help build a house because we build so many houses here, and we had to import the toilet. Like there's nowhere in that country that makes toilets. Not a single factory anywhere, right? So most of the things we had to import like nothing is made there because it's an island, right? So it's a very, very different situation, especially if you're an immigration firm, right? It's really, really difficult to be like, let me immigrate you to a place that's more expensive. Like most people don't do that, right? So way, 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 way simpler to be like, okay, let me give you a life reset, immigrate you to a place that's not only less expensive, but by immigrating you to that place, I can actually make you rich immediately. You know what I mean? By our definition of rich. Actually, I heard, what's the guy's name? I heard one of these speakers actually use our definition. Maybe it's his definition. I'm not saying he took it from us. What the hell was the guy's name? It'll come to me. But by our definition of rich, it's do you have more passive income than your burn rate? If you have more passive income than your burn rate, you're rich. You're not necessarily wealthy, but you're rich, right? Scott Galloway. Scott Galloway is the guy's name. Big famous guy. I actually heard him say exactly those same words just yesterday. It was hilarious. But if you have more passive income than your burn rate is like your monthly budget, like what you spend a month. All right. And I guess it could be a yearly burn rate, but we're talking monthly. So if you have more monthly passive income, not I go to work and get a paycheck, passive income, then your burn rate, you are rich. All right. So if while you're sleeping, you make more money than you spend, you are rich. Okay. Now, we have the bond laddering, special that we can do for right now until the bond rates go back to insignificant rates, which typically they are. Right, bonds are such a safe investment that typically you get very little return because the investment is so safe. Okay, that's the rule of investing. Higher the risk, the higher the reward. Right, lower the risk, lower the reward. Because this is a developing nation, though, we're in a very special situation where the bond rates right now are larger than the S&P 500. Right? So what's going on right now is the bond rates are incredible. So folks are able to come over, buy 6 bonds at a certain dollar amount, and as soon as they do that, bonds pay out semi-annually. So they pay out once every 6 months. So as long as you strategically target those bonds, every single month you're getting a payment, right? Now, a lot of these payments have been adding up to like 50,000 local currency, which is typically enough for small families and single parents and all that to easily get by month to month without spending it all, right? And so now all of a sudden, with that one move, you've now relocated. You own your house, you own your car, you own your land. There's no taxes. Maybe you have solar backup and all that, so you don't even need an electric bill. There's no water bill. Because you have your own well. There's no sewer bill because you have a biodigester, so you don't even need to pump out the septic system. Like, you're just all the way good, right? And now all of a sudden you're getting these checks every month from the government for the next 10 years where you don't even need to work. Now all of a sudden you're rich, right? So it's been beautiful for a lot of people because they've left inner city Philly, LA, all of these places where they were just getting by, even though they had a ton of money. And then they make this move. Some of them are even just pulling it right out of their like 401k, like F it, I'll pay the penalty. Why? Because the penalty is 10% and I don't have to pay it till next year. And I'm making 14% on these bonds. So not only can I come over and just go ahead and do it, but the bonds are going to give me the money I need to pay off the 10%. Right? So a lot of folks are just like, F it, I'll pay the penalty and never have to work again. Right? Other folks, are taking, lines of credit and stuff like that. And 6 months later, saying, hey, look, I can't handle this credit. I'm going to file a chapter whatever, and do a bankruptcy and discharge the debt. And again, live the rest of their lives without having to work a single day. Right. So it's one of those things where that's way easier a proposition than to say, well, let me move you to this island where everything is imported, where they manufacture nothing, and it's going to cost you twice as much as where you used to live. How does that sound to you? Doesn't sound too good. Versus, let me move you to this other place where everything is manufactured there. You can get all your creature comforts and not miss anything from your lifestyle. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to work another day in your life. How does that sound? Right? So it's a very, very different proposition. Right. So it becomes like a luxury option. Yeah. So that's why, like, we probably will have something in Grenada specifically. Grenada is one of those countries that almost 100% of our passport portfolio clients choose. So generational wealth clients typically get to a point where they need to start building a passport portfolio. Some of them do it immediately, which is the smartest way to do it because it takes a shit ton of time and generations to do. But they typically get to a point at some point where they're ready for a passport portfolio. When that happens, we have to map out their path to the passports that are most meaningful to them based on the current. Typically, the Grenadian passport is in there for virtually everyone. It's one of the few passports that's universal. And so it kind of makes sense to have an office in Grenada based on that. However, people who can afford to pay more and they want to relocate to a place where it's actually more expensive because they got it like that, so that would be a luxury relocation location. No, 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 not Grenada, not Spain. Grenada, Caribbean. Grenada is an island off the coast of Spain. Grenada is a Caribbean island. But why? Because it grants them access to the EC Bank. The EC Bank is an incredibly stable currency. All right. So having citizenship access to the EC Bank is a strategic move that allows you to do more with your family investments. Right. So your family office will be very happy that you have an EC passport. Put the family. No, no. We typically the number one spot for family offices, once they're fully matured, because you'll get like a micro family office first. You can have a micro family office now, and then you might. This is completely up to the individual organization. You might have what's called a multi-family office once you go away from micro. So if you have a multi-family office, it's an organization for family offices, typically under a certain dollar amount, where they feel as though because they're under a certain dollar amount, they don't have enough wealth to support their own fully fledged family office. So they go in with with a bunch of other minorly wealthy families, right? Top combine into one family office. So then they can afford some really serious wealth management people to be working in this office, and then like the 10 families all kind of sharing in the benefits of that family office, right? So that's called a multi-family office, and then above that is an independent family office, but those kind of levels are dictated by you hiring out to do it. The families who end up designating a family member to do it can typically run their own family office from the micro level on, right? So if there's always somebody who's going to get their finance degree and MBA and going to get a Series 7 license and all of that stuff within the family, and that person runs the family office, then the cost of the family office is dramatically reduced. The returns might be as well, right? Like that person might not be as skilled as the guy who worked for Berkshire Hathaway for 30 years, but those families who do it independently can typically just run their own family office from micro on up. So it just depends on how you're doing it. If you're bringing in a corporate professional to run your family office, then they have minimums on how much assets need to be on their management for them to even take you as a client. And the reason why they do that is because they charge a percentage of those assets under management. So if they expect to make $1 million a year off of every client, then that client might need to have 100 million in assets under management if their asset under management fee is 1%, right? So that's how they get the number. It has nothing to do with what's functional. It has everything to do with whatever their business structure is and their profit structure. Does that answer the question? Oh no, I didn't answer the question. Duh. All right, so the number one jurisdiction is Singapore. Yeah, number one jurisdiction is Singapore, and they normally have to sacrifice a family member in order to get Singapore. So what does that mean? That means they've been building these passport portfolios for a generation or two. They're ready to open a family office in Singapore, and get all the benefits that entails. But Singapore has a rule that in order to get the Singapore passport, you have to give up all your other passports. So that entire situation of you set up over the last 30, 40 years, that particular of your family has to give up all of that work that you've done. And as a reward for that, they typically get paid very well, and they're running the family office in Singapore. the family office manager for a set term, and that set term is typically significant. So we're talking like you got a 30-year term as the asset manager, right, or the family office manager, and then after that 30 years, someone in the family will be groomed to replace them. So there might be a 10 years of semi-retirement, and then so you put 40 years in, very similar to like a military or anything like that, and then after that the family office slash family trust would actually take care of that person for life in a very different way than they do the beneficiaries of the trust, right? So it's actually like a pension. So that's the most typical way that we see that happening. And I guess there's other ways to it. Most of our clients, they get to that level, that's the way they do it. So now that should have answered your question. Why not? Why not done it all in your own? What does that say? That's really weird. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble reading that. Why not done it all in Covry? Why not done it all in Covry? I don't. Is Covry? Is Covry a country I've never heard of? I don't know. I don't know what you're saying. Oh, why not do it all in your own country? Oh, because different countries have different rules. Some countries focus on, you know, folks to come through, right? So different countries have different rules, and so it just depends on what it is you're doing. Singapore literally incentivizes people to bring family offices to Singapore. That's what that country wants. So that's why. Just depends. No, actually. Well, asset protection is definitely for the rich because you have to have an asset to protect. But generational wealth is the exact opposite. Generational wealth, you can start with anything. You can start generational wealth with $1. It's just going to take you 500 years to get any money out of that dollar. But you could, start generational wealth with virtually any amount of money, and then it'll compound over time and become something. But the larger the amount, or the more payments that you make in, the faster it'll compound. Your issue, especially by the way you phrase that question, is that you want something out of it, right? So you're looking at it almost from an opportunity cost perspective, and you want something out of it, which is the word most people make, where they're like, "Oh, I'm just going to go get rich, and then after I get rich, I'm going to give my riches to the next generation," which the chances of that happening are about 10%. So that's the issue, is with the direction you're looking at it from. But the generational wealth planning wouldn't benefit you at all, or at least that's the way you should think about it. Sometimes it does. Like sometimes you do the generational wealth thing, and then you get old and sick, and the trust fund kids take some of that trust fund and pay for your nursing home. You know what I mean? And put you in a really nice one, and like, or give you a live-in nurse, and you don't have to go to a nursing home. You know what I mean? So in that way, sometimes it benefits you, but you shouldn't be banking on that because it needs time to grow. So it's going to be something nice for them, but not necessarily for you. How important are family reunions for generational wealth? They're not necessarily important, but we typically kill two birds with one stone. So what is important is the family business meeting, right? But you don't need it to be just some boring business meeting, some annual meeting, of the trustees or of the family. So what you do is you combine the two, right? So like for like my family, it ends July 29th. That's the last day of like our family, reunion, so to speak. And it's 2 weeks. So inside of that, people who are part of the family trust, they have their meeting and they have their trust meeting. The greater family can have, conversations around the family constitution. Education happens there, so financial literacy education and all of that happens. So once the trust starts making money, the trust can pay for certain things, right? So you might fly a Harvard MBA professor out for the weekend and like give him and his family a free vacation in the Maldives where you're having your family reunion at. So I'm gonna pay all expenses paid, 5 days in the Maldives for you and your family. You're gonna have a great little suite, that's underneath the water, blah 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 blah. And then we're also gonna pay you $1,000 an hour to teach Harvard level financial literacy to our kids, for 4 hours a day for 2 days. You know what I mean? So those kind of things are what's important, and they happen within the circumference of the family reunion, so that the family reunion isn't optional, right? It's the annual meeting for all the shareholders of the company businesses. It's the annual meeting for the trust corporation. It's the annual meeting for the family, at large. And there are certain things like that. Education is a requirement to maintain eligibility as a beneficiary of the trust. So if you don't have the education necessary to move the trust forward and to take it to the next level, financially, then you're not in it, because then the only thing that you can possibly do is destroy it, right? So if you're not there taking that education, then the trust very well might kick you out of the trust, and kick you out of trust eligibility. So it becomes something that's not optional. It becomes something that's mandatory. As many as exist. Like the Kennedy Trust has so many beneficiaries that they don't know each other. Right. There was it a Netflix documentary? I'm trying to think, because I feel like it was so long ago that Netflix wasn't making documentaries yet. It might have been like a CBS documentary, something like that. But there's a documentary you can go look up, and it's about a fake Kennedy, right? And so it follows the victims, all these multiple women who thought they were dating a Kennedy trust heir. And then what he would do is he would take the money from the last woman, take the new woman out on this extravagant vacation, and they would go to Monaco and they would go to Lake Como, and where the rich play. He walked the walk, he talked the talk, he wore the ascot and all of that, all the stuff that you would in your mind think a Kennedy heir might look like. He was at Barack Obama's inauguration in the front row. He was also, I think, at George Bush's inauguration in the front row, and got there as a Kennedy, right? And it ended up being that the Kennedy family historian had to search the archives to prove that he wasn't a Kennedy. So it wasn't like the other Kennedys were just like, that's not our cousin. There's too many of them, right? Within 3 generations, there could be 32 of you. Right. So that's just, and those 3 generations, I'm not talking about, like, people think of generations as a stopgap. I'm not talking about stopgap generations. I'm talking about if grandma is alive and grandma had kids, there's 1 generation, right? And then if grandma's kids had kids, there's another generation. But grandma's a generation, there's grandma's generation. Right. So your kids and your grandkids, right there, you have 2 generations from you. But are there people alive who know their great grandkids? Absolutely. Right. So there's even 3 generations removed from them. So there could be 32 people alive in that clan that are all part of the trust that grandma, or great grandma set up, and she's still alive. Right. So it very, very quickly gets to a point where you don't know everybody in the trust. Right. And so at that point, the trust can have, up teen, beneficiaries, just an absurd number of beneficiaries. But compounding moves in such a way that the trust can typically still keep up with it if everybody has, financial literacy, right? So if everybody has financial literacy, if the trust was developed the right way, not only would the trust be able to keep up with everybody, but a pendant trust would have popped up by that point, right? So maybe the grandson is extraordinarily successful in a business that the trust gave them the seed money to start, and then now they create their own line, they set up their own trust, and the trust now only puts money into their trust, not the members of their house anymore, right? So there's a payment that might go from the main trust to this branch trust, and then the branch trust handles its own affairs and has a bunch of beneficiaries that are from whatever line, right? The Shrivers are like that. The Shrivers are a Kennedy line, right? That they're the line that I suppose technically Arnold Schwarzenegger became part of when he married one of them. They're Kennedys, but their name has changed to Shriver through like marriage and stuff. So the Shrivers have the Shriver Family Trust, and they're connected to the Kennedy Family Trust, right? Because they are Kennedys. So that eventually just happens over time. How many do you have to start with? There's no minimum on starting. So you can start with one. You can start with none. You can start with the declared beneficiary who does not exist, right? And not as like some kind of weird game, right? You can, let's say you're 21, but you got your head on straight, right? And maybe you're a 21-year-old female and you're engaged to a 24-year-old male, right? So you're engaged, you're about to get married, or maybe you even are married, right? Newlyweds, and you just got your head on straight. You got no kids, but you understand how money works. And so you create a family trust that will eventually be there for your grandkids because maybe you understand how money works, but you don't have a lot of it. So you know you're not going to compound enough in your kid's lifetime. So you set up a generational wealth trust and you name your true born grandkids as the beneficiaries, right? So then when your kids would probably be named as trustee in your absence, right? So that's probably how that would go, unless you have a trustee company, right? So you set up that trust for those grandkids. You don't know the names of your grandkids. You don't even have kids yet, right? So there would be a mechanism built into the trust, probably DNA testing, that would set it up so that when you do have kids, they get tested. They have to match both of the people who created the trust, and then their kids would then qualify, right? We have clients like that who are like divorced, but their trust only allows the children of their union to qualify. So even though they're divorced, they set up the trust when they were together, and everything that's in that trust only supports their children. So they both move on, they both have new people, they got to make two new trusts. The kids that they make with those new people do not qualify for the trust under their previous marriage, right? Because that's how they set it up. So, you can set it up any kind of way, that you need to, and whoever you want to be the beneficiary can be the beneficiary. It doesn't even have to be people who are related to you. There was a trust that was set up in Reading, Pennsylvania, and the trust pays for the school. There's a street in Reading. What is it called? 13th Street, I think. Yeah, 13th Street. So on 13th Street, there is an elementary school, there is a middle school, and there is a high school, and there is a college, right? So it's what is it? It's Alvernia University. I think there's like 12th and something elementary school. There's the middle school is Northeast Middle School, and then the high school is Reading High School, right? So the way that that trust works is if you go to all of the schools on the street, you get to go to the college for free. It was just some rich guy, had no kids or whatever, tried to figure out what am I going to do with this money. I'm not going to give it to the government when I die. I don't have any kids. So he created this trust that became like an endowment. And as long as you go to all of the schools on that street, you get to go to the college that's on that street for free. Right? So you can set things up to do whatever you want. It doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. Right. Yeah, that would it compounds forever. Right? So as the population grows, it's been compounding for years. So even if it's 100 kids a year that are going to that school, it doesn't matter because it's been compounding for years and it continues to compound. So as long as there's no trustee mismanagement, and as long as it was developed properly, then yeah, and it can have a cutoff. It could say okay, up to 50% of the net, returns. So the principal is always preserved, and then every year the principal is bigger, and then 50% of what is made off of the principal is what's available, for the scholarship. So you can set it up any way you want to make sure that it lasts perpetually. Does that answer both of your questions? Vibes, does that answer your question? Colorado, did that answer your question? Awesome, awesome. Yes, that's called an appendant trust, Colorado. So, what they asked on the other live was, can your trust force your beneficiaries to create other trusts? Yes, you can do that. So, let's say you do the trust thing where the grandkids are the beneficiaries, right? But eventually, your kids and your grandkids are going to be alive at the same time, right? And so if you want your kids to kind of benefit, you can say, okay, here's the way this is going to work. My kids are required to create a trust for their grandkids. All right. So there's another generation, no like gap, right? And when they do that, they'll meet the requirement to become the trustee of the trust for my grandkids, right? Which is their child, right? And then in the trust deed, the document that controls that trust, what would end up happening was the trustees get paid a certain percentage. Maybe it's 2%, maybe it's 3%, something like that. So then your kids start making a little bit of benefit off of the trust that was set up for the grandkids, and but they're also forced to create another trust, right? So you can do that. Yes. I only have one child, and what I that decides not to have children, which a lot of women are doing now. Well, there's a couple of things with that. As far as from our perspective and what we found by our experience, there's a couple things kind of built into the answer of what you're asking, right? Number one, right, without really getting into real life experience and just kind of answering the question as is, a lot of trust can be converted to I just said the word. My brain is farting on me right now. It can be endowments. A lot of trust can be converted to an endowment, right? So the endowment can take care of whatever it is. Maybe you want, help for single mothers, right? And so it can be converted into an endowment that then does weird things like that Alvernia College thing I was just about, where kids that go to all the schools on the same street get to go to the college on the same street for free. Okay, so that can happen. However, in our experience, the reason why women are deciding not to have children, or at least one of the reasons, is because of the complexity of trying to, raise that child in a single situation, right? Most of our clients that arrived with that mindset have two or three kids now, right? And because once you change your finances and you change that situation and you can then afford more help, one of the reasons why you might be deciding not to have children kind of disappears. Not even kind of, it does, right? So, like even me in my situation, I'm able to have the governess and the nanny and the maid and all of that stuff, right? If I didn't have all of those things, maybe, having my son wouldn't have been something that I relished as much, right? But I can afford the support. So there's a lot of folks that when we're talking to them about relocating from the U.S. to Kenya, they're of that mindset, like, I'm a single mother, I don't want to do this again, or I don't even want any kids. I can't even afford a house. I can barely afford my apartment. Like this world sucks. I don't want a kid. Then we bring them out here, and they don't ever have to work again a day in their life because they get the bond laddering, right? So they're getting a check from the government, and it's not welfare; it's their investment, right? So they're getting a check from the government every month that covers all of their bills, and they have a private maid and they have a private chef, and they can hire a nanny who has a master's degree in childhood education, and they can do all of these things now, and now they're not so concerned about not having kids anymore, right? So for us, from a real world experience, we don't see people maintaining that mindset after their money problems have been fixed. Does it happen? Maybe, but we've just never encountered it. We've encountered people who say that, and then once their money situation has been fixed by one of our programs, they essentially renege on it. So once you're building that trust and that trust is compounding, it'll eventually get to a monetary point where that may not matter. Now, does it get to that point when you've passed the physical ability to maybe have maybe we've just never encountered that. But so yeah. So if it does happen, you can turn the trust into an endowment. Typically it doesn't happen and the trust proceeds as planned. I don't think that's like a woman thing. Like even me, I had my son at 42 because it wasn't financially feasible for me to try to be having kids in the United States, even though I was making a significant income, but it was still like living paycheck to paycheck. So now, we have the support, we have the village style support, even though like we're paying them, you know what I mean? Like, but we have that village style support and everything. I got some friends, I got some friends that live in Washington State, and they don't even have the setup we have. They have two nannies that both work full time, so it's like a 40-hour nanny at night, 40-hour nanny, during the day. I think they do it like a second shift and night shift nanny, obviously 5 days a week, 8-hour shifts. Um, they're paying like $250,000, well, with like healthcare and social security and like all the stuff they got to pay for these employees, unemployment taxes and all of that, plus what they're paying them, plus it's a baby, so they go into overtime often. Now you're paying time and a half, you know what I mean, and all that. It's absurd. We're not paying $100,000 a year. You know what I mean? We're not even paying $50,000 a year, right? For 24 service for 24/7 coverage, right? So it's a whole different ball game. It's a different universe. You know what I mean? If they had 24/7 coverage, they'd be paying $1 million a year to have 24/7. That's three part-time, nannies, two full-time nannies. Sometimes overtime happens. You got to pay everybody's, stuff, their social security, their, all of that stuff. We got to pay the stuff as well. It's just, that the currency exchange is so dramatic that it's like nothing, right? So it just depends on like where you are in life, and some of these moves can elevate you to a position in life where it's like you can finally breathe. So that's how that works. Hopefully I answered your question. Well, no, you're right. Well, there's a lot of science happening, but yes, in general, you're right. You need someone else. But I'll tell you what, when you're free, like when you're financially free and you're living, you want to live on your terms, the people you attract are very, very different. So, again, that's just an observation that we've come to off of like real world experience and seeing what happens with our clients. And when they come here and they're in a position like they're bond laddering, and so they're in a position where for the next 10 years they're getting a check from the government, and it's their it's their investment, and so it's their passive income, and they don't technically have to work at all. The confidence changes, the way they walk, the way they walk into a room changes, the rooms they walk into change, right? And so the people that they're exposed to changes, and the people that they meet, are on, they're equally yoked, they're on a different caliber. And so what ends up blossoming out of that is typically something very different to what has happened before, because if you want something different in your life, you got to do something different in your life. And that's as different as it gets, right? And so typically things change. So yes, it does take two, but they typically find that second person pretty quickly. Benefits of setting up on the coast over Nairobi. I mean, I guess it just depends on what you want. If you have kids, there's definitely less crime. There's less gangs. Like every major city has gangs. Every major city has violent crime. So there's that, right? You can obviously live in like the better parts of the city where you hope you're insulated from that. But there are specific, like in the United States, MS-13 only recruits in the suburbs. They only recruit in upper class neighborhoods. They don't recruit in the hood. After like kids that their parents have put them in boarding school, and all they want is for their parents to recognize them, and instead their parents are shipping them off to, like, that's who they recruit. Right? So it doesn't always help that you're in this upper class neighborhood where you think you're safe. So cities are just always like that, right? It's not a Nairobi thing. Philly's the same way. New York City's the same way. LA's the same way. Houston and Dallas are the same way. So any major city, you're going to run into that. Like here, for example, I happen to be specifically in Diani, but here the violent crime rate is under 1%, right? So, as my son grows, can I let him walk across the street himself to the beach? I can. Can I let him, I'm going to go to the beach, spend 4 hours there with my friends and swim and play and blah, 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 blah? I can, right? In Nairobi, you get the same thing that you got with, again, any other major city. It's not a critique of Nairobi, but you don't necessarily even know who your neighbors are, right? You're living in some high rise condo or whatever. You don't necessarily know who lives around you. Here, I have friends that I don't even know their name, because the tradition here is to call people by their children's name. Right? So I know who Mama Maria is, but I don't know Mama Maria's name, maybe. Or I know who, Baba Shadrach is, the father of Shadrach, but I don't actually know Baba Shadrach's name. And they'll call me Baba Marcel, you know what I mean? But maybe they don't know my name is John, but they know my son's name, right? So that's how it is out here, because we're not in the city. So when someone sees my kid, they know whose kid it is, right? If something goes, they kind of pitches in and helps. So you get that village thing, city. Now that's not necessarily a specific coast benefit. It's just not being in the city benefit. The coast just happens to be like the beach, right? So I like tropical stuff. You know what I mean? So I like the beach, because of that. If you don't, like if you're from Montana or something and you actually like that, there are places like that here, right? Elevation, even though we're all on the equator, elevation changes the weather. So if you're high enough in the mountains, it's still going to be cold. Like people are up there wearing sweaters and stuff, and whatever. There's snow at the top of Mount Kenya, and we're at the equator, right? So the elevation is what changes, the weather that you live under. So you can be out here and, live in a cold place if you want, even though, we're at the equator. So it's just a matter of how much infrastructure is there, right? Number one. And because if you're out in the middle of the bush, that's a whole different other group of problems, right? So how much infrastructure is there? Education typically tempers violence, right? Which is why in the United States there was a Supreme Court decision that said that police departments are allowed to deny applicants who have too high of an IQ because they're too smart to pull out their service pistol and unalive people, right? So they actually hired dumber people for the police department, and the Supreme Court, said yes, you can do that. So if there's good education in that area, you're going to have less violence. If there's good infrastructure in that area, you're going to have less violence. Typically, if you're in a place where people have a lot to lose, they treat each other better, right? So if you can sue me and actually get stuff out of me, I'm not going to be as ignorant to you, So it's one of those things as when you're in a major city, everybody's kind of lumped together. So you're walking down the street, you don't know who's who. It could be somebody who ain't got nothing to lose and you got everything to lose, right? So that's a recipe for disaster, in and of itself. So being outside of the major cities just gives you that more kind of country, feel to everything. And then it's a balancing act of what's available to you versus what you want, right? So I live in like a tourist area, right? So we have everything. You know what I mean? We have good infrastructure. We're building a mall right now, actually. A lot of our roads are like paved and all of that. We have all this sunlight because it's the equator, so we get 12 hours a day, 12 hours a night, so we can do off-grid solar very, very easily and all of that stuff. So it's for me, it's the perfect blend of the two worlds, right? I'm not missing anything by living where I'm living. But you can be on the coast and be in a village, right? And like not have access to like a decent hospital, or easy access to like a decent hospital, and all your roads are rough roads where you're bouncing up and down in the car, and don't have any paving on the road, and blah 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 blah. So it's a matter of balance as to like what you want out of life. Some people, it's a pure D business decision. Like they have to be in Nairobi. Like if you work for the UN or if you're a contractor for the UN, well, the UN's in Nairobi, right? But even those guys, especially because of the difference in the currency exchange, I guess. Even those guys typically have a weekend house down here at the coast. There's a lot of folks work for UN, so they live in Nairobi Monday through Friday, and come Friday when they clock out, they fly down here, and so their kids are down here where it's safe, right? They got an apartment up there, while they're working, but their kids are raised down here. So it just depends on like what it is you're looking for. No, it's not even close. Like even though there's crime in Nairobi, it's like it doesn't. I don't know what's the most mute major city in the United States. I don't know what would that be. I don't know, but the most mute city in the United States has more crime than Nairobi. Definitely. Are the infrastructure bonds open? There is not an infrastructure bond open right now. However, both of the bonds that are open right now are outstanding, but they're neither one are infrastructure bonds. So they both have a 10% withholding tax. That withholding tax is held before the payment hits you, right? So right now, all of our clients that are bond laddering clients, every single one of them went ahead and authorized the purchasing of both of the bonds that are available this month. So they got both of them, which actually gave them 4 payments. So each bond gives you 2 payments. So all of those clients, some of those clients actually finished their bond ladder with this bond. Some folks, their bond ladder was done and they were like, you know what? Give me 4 extra payments anyway. And so they wired in additional funds to get both of the bonds that are available right now. but they're both quite good, even though they're not infrastructure bonds, so they're not tax exempt. This year there was only one. This year there was only one infrastructure bond. Last year there was three. I be telling y'all, y'all better hurry up. This bond thing is not going to last forever. There was three infrastructure bonds last year, or maybe even four. There was only one this year, right? Next year might not be none. So y'all better hurry up. The bond thing will not last forever. There are people out here literally living their best lives, ain't got to worry about work, ain't got to worry about nothing. They get a direct deposit every month and they're good, right? They own their own house, they own their own car, and they're getting the money that they paid into the bonds back. You get your principal back, right? 10 years, and they're solid. Their life is has changed 100%, 300, 180 degrees, and so, but it is not going to last forever. It's unsustainable. You can't have bonds that pay out better returns than the S&P 500 and it lasts forever, right? So eventually the bonds are going to go back to their regular interest rates, and then this opportunity is going to be gone. So don't miss it. Don't miss it. Definitely get your bond ladder and going. If you can afford the bond ladder, now is the time to do it. Ooh, you're new here. What is bond laddering? So bonds pay out biannually. They pay out every 6 months. Okay. And so bonds are typically like if you go, I think I looked the other day, and like in the United States, a U.S. Treasury bond, I think I saw one for 4%, which is that's worse than inflation. So you're actually losing money if you buy that bond. But what we primarily saw was like 7%, right? So like maybe 1%, 2% above inflation type of thing. Because it's a developed country, right? Probably the same situation in the UK, as a developed country. In developing countries, in order to fund their infrastructure projects, they'll borrow from the people, right? That's what a bond is. You are the bank, the government's taking a loan, they guarantee you a percentage of return on your loan, right? Historically, the S&P 500 trade grows at about 10% a year. So you get about a 10% ROI, 10.5%, depending on who's doing, the statistics per year, right? The bonds this 80%. So they're both above S&P 500. One of them is 13.2 years to maturity. The other one is 21.8 years to maturity. I can show you guys that also. Okay. And so those are the bonds that are available currently, right? And so the S&P 500 goes up, down, up, down, right? But if you hold it long enough, you should average out to 10%. But the government's guaranteeing you 14% over the next 21 years annually, right? So that's what's going on with the bonds. That's why the bonds are so crazy right now. That's why everybody's like raving about them. But obviously, that cannot last, right? You have to move on the bond laddering if you want to be able, to relocate here and live here, without having to work at all, you know. So for this 21 year, bond, there's 21.8 years left to maturity because it started as a 25-year bond, right? You're going to have about 10 years before the amortization hits in such a way where, the money's not enough anymore. You're going to have like 10 years that you don't have to work at all, right? And with the amortization, what ends up happening is they give you a piece of your capital back. So every time they give you a chunk of your capital back, you have less capital in the bond. So the payments that are coming out are lower, right? But by then, you should have other investments, right? Like you should be sitting on your laurels just because you now have passive income that exceeds your monthly, burn rate. You should be like, all right, cool. I got money, I can breathe. What's the next investment, right? So by the time you get to any kind of amortization, or by the time the bond is done, you should already have a bunch of other, streams of income coming in supporting you. Next year is days away. I'm preparing myself for that infrastructure bond drop. I mean, again, maybe only one will drop for the year. So, and you can't ladder on one bond. So, most of our people this year did get the infrastructure bond because I think it was in June, right? So it was late enough in the year that like anyone who was bond laddering was pretty much ordered by then. So most people did get the infrastructure bond. But you if you wait for it, just infrastructure bonds. There's never been a year where there was enough infrastructure bonds that all of your portfolio could be infrastructure bonds. So they're the icing on the cake, right? But they're not something that you should be waiting for if your goal is laddering and not having to work again. Then you should be waiting for that. I see these investment apps on M-Pesa. Any feedback on those? I don't know. You'd have to be specific. I'm not sure which ones are on M-Pesa, but most of the stuff on M-Pesa isn't only on M-Pesa. So let me know what you're talking about. No, you can't see it because you're on Facebook. Sorry about that. The Facebook doesn't have the ability for me to. At least I don't. I've never found the ability for me to throw up a green screen like the other ones. So I can't show it. Yeah, I'm even looking again right now. I don't think it's an TikTok and YouTube can see the bonds that I was talking about, and they may have closed. I got to see when the auction close date is. No, no, we did onboard a ton of people in the last couple of weeks. Most of them for bond laddering, but they're not going to get their first bond until like February, right? So it takes a while for us to get you into the system and get your paperwork set up, and then get a tax ID number, and then get a CSD account to even buy the bond for you. So just because they onboarded now, they're not going to get access to this. And then our special, our onboarding special right now, our holiday special really is going to be done by February. Hello. So what are we looking at? So what you see behind me here are the two bonds. I believe they're open now. If they're not, they just closed. But they're the two bonds that are available for purchase currently. Um, One of them is a 21.8 year treasury bond that guarantees 14 point, what does it say here, 14.188%, with a 10% withholding tax, and the 10% withholding tax is only on the ROI, not on the principal. And then the other bond is a 13-year to maturity bond that's been reopened, and it's guaranteeing 12.873% with the 10% withholding tax on the return on investment, again, not on the principal. And so these two bonds actually have, yep, per year, which is what, 4% higher than the S&P 500. So both of these bonds have different payout schedules. So all of our clients that are clients and generational wealth clients have actually purchased both of these. 100% of our clients that are, generational wealth bond laddering clients have actually ordered both of these bonds because they pay out in separate months. So bonds always pay out biannually. So these two bonds in this 1 month have provided monthly payouts for 4 months out of the year for all of the clients who purchased them. And the payouts, as you can see there, are already pre-scripted. So you know exactly what day you're going to be paid out. So you can see the small bond, the 13-year one up here. It's what, March and September, right? They do their dates different than we do in America. So March and September is what it's showing here, and then down here it's showing April and October, right? So they got an April and October payment, and they got their March and September payment all in the same month. So this has actually been a really good month for our generational wealth clients and our waterfall clients who want to move here and never have to work again. This is going to pay them for 4 months out of the year. For one of them is for the next 13 years, and the other one is for the next 21 years. So we normally look at it as 10%, which no one ever gets 10%. So our benchmark is 10%, and our benchmark for years is 10 years. So both of these exceed our benchmarks. So you can kind of get a feel for, we set these benchmarks, in such a way that you're pleasantly surprised, typically, when it comes out. But it also gives us the breathing room that when this goes away, because it will not last forever, when this goes away and the interest rates normalize for bonds and they go back down to like 7%, 6%, and it's no longer, the great deal that it was, as that is happening, we can get to 10% and still be within benchmark, and then essentially close it down and say, all right, that's it. They're gone. You waited too long. So the 14% is broken down into four payouts. The bonds are two payouts per year. So there's a 14% bond, there's a 12% bond. Both of them pay twice a year, right? So all bonds pay biannually. But by buying both of these bonds, four payments above 10% will hit the bank accounts of our clients per year. Remember, 10% is the benchmark. So they're figuring out what they need to live, and then they're using the 10% benchmark. So every single person that we figured out what it is that their monthly expenses are going to be and bought their bonds accordingly, they're actually going to get more than they need every single month, because we've never actually had a 10% bond. Everything has been above 10%. But our calculations are always based on 10%. So a lot of people finished their ladder with this one because they got four payments. So that's an entire quarter of the year just with this one purchase. Sometimes what'll end up happening is like this will be like a 5 year, and then this one over here will be like a 20 year. So they only buy this one because this one, 5 years doesn't necessarily make sense, right? Depending on what they're trying to build out. So some months there's only one even available. Two. Then they wait the next month, and they get two more. Now they got 4 months. They wait the next month. Now they got 6 months. And then but this month was because both of them are long enough to allow someone to essentially not have to work for 10 years. And so a lot of folks bought both of these, which gave them an entire quarter of the year in 1 month's worth of purchases. The app is ZD. That one I have not heard about, so I cannot make comment on that one. They should have disclosures though, and it should say something about authorized by like the Capital Management Authority or something like that. So yeah. For example, so 100K in one would pay out 5K twice a year. Right. Using the 10% benchmark. Correct. So the thing is, though, there's something called amortization schedules. And so with the amortization schedule, if you're under a certain benchmark in the investment, at the first amortization, instead of giving you a percentage of your principal back, they just give you all your money back, right? So if you bought 100K in the bond, when you got to the first amortization schedule, they'll just give you your 100K back. Now you're not in the bond anymore. They'll pay you your interest twice a year, but as soon as you get to the first amortization, you just get it all back. So you got to be over 1 million Kenyan shillings to not get affected by amortization. So if you're over 1 million Kenyan shillings, then what ends up happening is in the first amortization, maybe they give you 500,000 back. That's why even though this thing is 21.8 years, we're not saying that you're not going to be able to work for 21 years. We're saying 10, right? Because in that amortization, when they give you back half of your million, Now you only got 500,000 in there. You still got the same interest rate. They can't change the interest rate, but you don't have the same amount of principal, right? So that's how amortization works. So that's why we're looking at a lower percentage as far as our target is concerned, all right? And we're looking at less years than are the years of maturity as well, because you're going to start getting your principal back. Now, you do get the money back. The issue then becomes, are you still going to have access to 14% when you get the first amortization back, right? Probably not. So if you take the 500,000 and you reinvest it in a bond, where are we at now? Maybe we're at 7%, right? Now we're below 10%, you know. Now, if it's still 10%, reinvest, of course, right? But typically, like the amortization for the 18.46% infrastructure bond, the first amortization already happened. Well, the bond that was available when that happened was like 16% or something like that. So it's like, all right, cool. I lost my 18% for the 500,000 that they're kicking back to me. I'm still in for another 500,000 at the 18.46%, but there's a 16 or 17% bond that's available right now. So I'll go ahead and reinvest that entire principal into this other one. And that one was 20 years. The 18.46% infrastructure bond that was February 2024, that was only 8.5 years because it was such an incredible, interest rate. So they made it a really small bond, but it was such an incredible interest rate that it was worth buying it even though it was short, right? Because folks were making, it's 18.46. So they were making 184,600 per month or per year. So that was cut in half, and they were getting half of that per month. So it was ugly, right? So it just depends on what those rates are as to whether it's worth it to get the small one. But most of our folks that are waterfalling, which means that they're not going to work for like the first 10 years, which is the target for them. They're not going to have to work at all for the first 10 years. They're looking for these big boys. The longest one that you can get is 30 years. So the longest treasury bond is 30 years. But as you can see here, this is a reopening of a 20-year and a 25-year bond. And that's why it's 4 different months in the payouts, because they're reopenings. So they can't change the payout cycle, right? So that's what makes this a really good month for most of our clients, is because they actually got a full quarter of payouts all in the same month. All right. Any questions on that? But the title was about trust fund. Yeah, no. Typically, they have a trust fund that owns bonds. Typically, you don't have to do that, but typically they do. So we have a couple different categories of client, right? Some clients are just generational wealth clients, and they're building generational wealth for the next generation, and they do not relocate here. They use these bonds as well to fund their generational wealth portfolio, essentially. Then we have clients that relocate here. They might use these bonds to live here without having to work, because the payout from the bond might cover their monthly expenses, right? Exceed their monthly expenses. And so there's different motivations for it, but typically it makes sense to utilize a trust, so that if you like you're sued, you don't own the bond. Nothing can, you know what I mean? And if you're sued and they're like, oh, you're getting, yeah, we're going to intercept that money. The trust doesn't have to pay the money out now, right? The trust can pay your mortgage directly, well, not mortgage, because most of our people, they're paid off, but the trust can pay, whatever your bills are directly instead of paying you. So there's nothing to intercept, right? So the trusts just give you another level of protection. Is there a minimum investment? Yes, there's a minimum investment. It's right there. Minimum investment is 50,000 shillings, which is, I don't know, $386. Obviously, that's not going to stop you from working, but yes, there's a minimum investment. Could you reinvest and compound the gains? Yes, but not in the same bond unless the bond reopens. So, like people who bought this bond when it originally opened, the name of the bond is FXD1 2022 25. The 25 means 25 years. 2022 is the year that it released, and it's a fixed bond, so it's an FXD bond. So, if you originally bought this bond in 2022 and it's been working so well for you for these, for the years that you've had it, this is the kind of opportunity where you could reinvest in the same bond, right? But like I was saying, if you have a generational wealth set up, that's exactly what you would be doing. Every time you got that monthly payment, the trustee of the trust would be investing in other things or buying more bonds and compounding that money. If you have a waterfall set up where you're actually living off the payments, then you're not compounding, right? You're using that money so that you don't have to work and that it's covering all your expenses on your relocation. So it just depends on what it is you're trying to do. Sorry, I think I missed something. All right. Any IFXD? Are you talking about an infrastructure bond? Looking to build wealth and also leverage the bond. So when people talk about leveraging, they're typically talking about debt. Um, so I don't know what you mean. Do you mean you want to take out a loan against the bond? You can do that, yes. You can do that. So you definitely can go to the bank. I know there's a bank that actually um, there's a bank that just announced it actually, and maybe it's Stanbic, but there's a bank that just announced that they're 100% open to giving loans against bonds. So I mean, yeah, you could do that. I'm not sure. Hmm. I mean, I guess there's a strategy there, so maybe. A lot of the U.S. strategies don't necessarily cross over cleanly because a lot of U.S. strategies are based on the deposit necessary for bank leverage, right? So, like when we do real estate syndication here, in America, you do real estate syndication, you're actually raising the down payment for the mortgage in the syndication, right? And the problem with that is it puts the bank in the first position. So if the syndication fails, the investors get nothing and the bank gets everything, right? Because typically what the bank gets doesn't actually cover the loan, so they just still take a loss. Here we do a real estate syndication, and the real estate syndication, so the investors are in the first position. So in the worst case scenario where the syndication fails, the investors still get some money back due to the sale of the land, right? So it's a different situation. So certain leverages don't make sense anymore because the system doesn't work the same way, but you could definitely do it. Like, it's there. So if you have some strategy that, you're working on, that utilizes leverage against the bond after you purchase it, um, the opportunity is there. Yeah, infrastructure bond. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. And so we have no idea when the next infrastructure bond is coming out. There was only one infrastructure bond this year. Last year there was three or maybe four. I think three though. So nobody can tell you when the next infrastructure bond is coming out, except for maybe the Treasury Secretary, right? But nobody knows. Like, take a loan and build a house. Huh. Maybe. We've never had anybody do it that way. So, like, for example, the special we're running now includes all 6 months of the bonds that'll pay you every month for 12 months, so for a year, right? So you're in a position where you possibly don't have to work again for the next 10 years. It includes the immigration to the country. Obviously, it includes a 50 by 100 plot of land in Deanne Beach within 15 minutes walk to the beach, right? It includes a 1,600 square foot house being built for you, and it's in your name. So you have the bonds, you have the house, you have the land, you have your permit, whatever permit you need, whether it's a Class K permit, Class G permit, Class M permit, whatever. So you're fully set up, right? You are 100% ready to immigrate to Kenya. You have everything, and you don't have to work again for the next 10 years of your life, right? And so typically when folks do that, they're in bond and then turning around and like on to get the house. And maybe it's just because of the way that we do things, since we're Diaspora Freedom Initiative. So our thing is that you have freedom. You know what I mean? So we're not really trying to get you stuck on their loans per se. But I mean, I guess you could. I guess if you saved up money for a house, right? Well, yeah, we work with Kenyan citizens too. But I guess if you saved up money for a house and that's all you got, and so you're like, all right, but I want the bonds before the bond interest rate changes. I guess you could. I guess you could go ahead and say, all right, listen, I'm going to buy the bonds, not the house. And then I'm going to put the bonds up as collateral for a loan to build the house. Then, I mean, I suppose you could definitely do that, right? Because I guess depending on how the loan is structured, the worst case scenario is you lose the bonds, but you could never lose the house because the land isn't the collateral for the loan. The bonds are, right? So that, special holiday special, every damn thing. So the holiday special, there are two tiers of the holiday special. There is, you get the house, you get your permit, you get land to build the house on, obviously, and you get the bonds. Right, and so that special is coming in at I think it's, what is it? No, without the car. The car is the upgrade. So it's 185. It's 185 for everything, and then if you want a car, it's 230. So if you want a car, it's 230, and so that is your relocation. Don't have to work anymore. Special. We're only running that until February. We're only running that until February because if we wait much longer than February, then we can't guarantee that we'll get you all 6 bonds. So we're only running the special until February, and then people will get their bonds, they get their house. We will convert your driver's license, but whether you get the car or not, you get your foreign certificate, you get your KRA stuff taken care of. You'll get your trust fund, so the trust fund is also part of that set up. So it's essentially everything. It's everything all in one. And then if you want the car, then you'll get the luxury SUV. The one that we're focused on right now, and there are options so you can actually get a different one, but the one that we're focused on actually has a 7-year warranty or 200,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. 200,000 kilometers is 124 miles for those Americans. So 124,000 miles. So 124,000 miles, or 7 years, which is significant, right? It's probably the best warranty on the Kenyan market right now. So that's what we're looking at as far as the car is concerned, and it's an SUV. So there's that. I'm sorry. It also includes a 1,600 square foot house. So there's that. So it's everything. Like, you're here, you own a house, you own a car, you own the land, you have a trust fund, you own the bonds, you're getting a payment every month from the government, you don't have to go to work, you're good, right? So it's essentially a full on setup, holiday special, but it only lasts until February, right? Only lasts till February, and like while we have stock as well, because we only have 10 more plots, right? There's only 10 more plots that are locked in at the price that makes the deal. So when we run out of that, of course, we'll look for more land, but that might end, the special. So, but yeah, a lot of people have been, there's been some pretty good, not reviews, but pretty good acceptance of the special. We did like 12 or 13 in the last 2 days. 17. All right, so we've done 17. So is there still, how many plots are left? It is 10. Okay. So yeah, we've done 17 in the last few days, and so so people are like, I mean, I wish I had it available to me. when I first started, to be able to come here and not have to work for the first 10 years, that's amazing. So pretty good special. Hey, MJ, how's it going? Yeah, oh my gosh. The stuff I would have accomplished. I hear you, Susan. The stuff I would have accomplished. Yeah. Yeah, if I didn't have to work. Could you substitute home plots for business plots? I mean, you can put a business on a plot. I guess this depends on whatever. You can build whatever you want on your plot. You get a 50 by 100. Now, the pricing on that is based on, I wonder if I can show it to you. It's based on the 1,600 square foot two bedroom house. So if you want to build some other type of structure, that might affect the pricing. So the special pricing is set up for that specifically. Trying to find a picture of the house if I can show it to you here. Was that one? Let's see. Maybe I don't have a picture of the house in this phone. Let's see. Not seeing it. Oh wait, there it is. All right, awesome. So TikTok sucks with that. Let me do the hand thing. Okay, now I gotta find the house again. Crap. There has to be an easier way. All right, let me locate the picture of the house again. I don't know why the way it crops photos when you put them up is ridiculous. And then the palm thing, it's like they're so small, but at least you can see the whole thing. So let me just find this picture again. Mm, that's the duplex. Yeah, I know. Sorry, Facebook. I can't. There's no way for me to show it to you, other than like to hold the phone in front of the other phone or something. But Meta is not great on the features. Okay, there it is. All right, so now there we go. So that is the design of the house that you get. So it's two stories. There's an office on the first floor. There are two bedrooms on the second floor. You have that big glass effect on the side. So yeah, that's it. All right. So that's what's built into the pricing. If you want to adjust the price, if you want to adjust like what the offering is, then it won't be the special anymore. So then it'll just be custom pricing. I am here every day at this time. Hey Jay, what's going on, man? Sorry, I was digging up that picture while you came in. So yeah, this is the house design that you get. We we do tend to change the roof typically. So the roof, instead of the sloped roof, we do the flat roof, and we can do the sloped roof because more cost effective for us to do the slope roof. We do the flat roof so that if you ever want a what do they call it? Like a rooftop that you can do stuff on, like you want to put up a gazebo on the rooftop and a functional roof. So we set up like a flat roof that's a functional roof where you have access to the rooftop, and we set it up where like if you want to expand the house later, somebody can come in and just expand the steps to the roof and all that. You put a gazebo up there and have an actual functional rooftop bar, rooftop, whatever. A lot of people come back and do that like a year later or whatever. So if that's something that might be something that the client is interested in, we don't do the sloped roof. We do what they call a hidden roof. So a hidden roof looks a lot like that, right? So the roof would just be flat and be ready for you to actually go up there and do stuff if you wanted to. Some people are like, nah, we're never going to do that. And so then we can put a sloped roof on. All right. Makes sense. Really good special though. I feel like it's probably one of the best specials we've ever done. So for you to get your immigration done, for you to get your the bonds done, which means that you have passive income coming in for the next without having to work. For you to get that and the land and all of that coming in under 200, that's really really good. Yeah, party. Yeah, no, I think we probably will do something with that. We got to see. Maybe April, maybe, because we have some like investor tour people coming in April anyway. So maybe we'll do it in April. Here we go with this nonsense. I guess let me turn it off. I hate the fact that like I'm looking for it again though if I do, but every time it sees my hand, it throws a picture on it. March is better. We'll see. We'll see. This is your birthday month? All right. All right. Yeah, we'll have to see what's happening. 2027. We're hoping that the bonds hold until then, just so they can use it as a point to get reelected. But we'll see. Why not? I was around for last election. Just depends on where you are. Kind of goes back to your question about Nairobi. Like back when they were like protesting and people were like shooting and all of that in Nairobi, nothing happened here. Like in Diani, we didn't even know the protests were happening. So it just depends on where you live. Yeah, Tanzania is wild. Yeah, it's always been on my like no go list because I always knew that they were. So I don't know, man. People just don't do due diligence. We always knew Tanzania was going to act like this because we did due diligence. So they were automatically on our blacklist. We would never even consider going there or doing business there. But people they move a lot based on vibes instead of facts, and then this is what happens. But yeah, Tanzania is a mess. Could be awesome too. I don't know. No, the people are great. That's the way it is everywhere. You know what I mean? I lived in China for years. The people are great. I did a job in Russia for like 2 months years ago, but like for like 2 months. The people are okay. Russians are a little interesting, but the people are okay, right? It's typically the government that's funky. Normally, the people are fine. How's Kenya so stable with so much instability? Because we don't depend on them. So that's a like when you're doing your market analysis and your governmental level SWOT analysis. That's part of the analysis. Are the trading partners their neighbors, and if so, by how much? So if there's instability in their neighbors, does it create instability in their GDP? With Kenya, the answer is no. Right. So because of that, like their neighbors could all go to war. Wouldn't matter at all, unless somebody attacked the Mombasa ports or something. But their trading partners are not necessarily their neighbors. So their neighbors can be as unstable as they want to be, and that instability wouldn't affect us. I mean, that's up to the government's analysis, right? If they want their neighbors to be trading partners, that'll be up to the government analysis. I think it's really, really difficult to do anything with Tanzania because they're almost a selfish government. Like they'll make a deal and then break it, right? So like they've already violated the East African Federation's kind of like open borders policy, right? So if you're an East African citizen, so citizen of Kenya, Uganda, Burundi, so actually, Rwanda, all of those, right? All of the people who are members, and Tanzania. You're supposed to be able to cross the borders and you're supposed to be able to do business across those lines because you're all East African citizens. But Tanzania has passed laws where foreigners, not making an exception for East African citizens, can't partake in really in most businesses because one of the 15 businesses that they banned foreigners from was small and medium enterprises. That like Hilton can come in no problem because they're big business, but small business is not allowed if it's a foreigner. So like the whole thing is stupid. So they've already violated the spirit of working together for no reason. The beef that they said they had was with the Chinese. So then pass a people can't, you know what I mean? So not a law that affects, fellow Africans, which wouldn't have affected me because I'd still be a foreigner. That's fine. If I'm not allowed to, I don't care. But why would you make it so that Kenyans and, Burundians and Rwandans and like your fellow Africans would have a problem just because you say you have a problem with a specific group, um, you know, dominating whatever. So they just don't think like the way they move. It's like their government acts like children. It's like they act emotionally. So, I mean, who would want to invest in that? You know what I mean? Then they even got it set up where you gotta renounce your citizenship to get their citizenship, which you get nothing for. So that doesn't make any sense. And if your kids get the opportunity to go to school abroad, and then maybe they get a really nice job abroad or whatever, and so they end up getting citizenship abroad, Now your children can't inherit your land, even though they were literally born in Tanzania. They've made it now so that like your Tanzanian children who have gone wherever they've gone for school, maybe got a job at Google or something, and you know got citizenship to make life easier wherever they're working. Now they can't inherit their family land. So where does it go? So the government steals the family land? Like who does it go to if your only child can't inherit it anymore because he got a job at Google? Like so, it's very very bizarre. So yeah, right. It's that kind of thing. It's very emotional, no logic, what is going on type of situation. So yeah, but not something that we get involved in, and not something that we would ever you know we would ever recommend it for our clients to get involved in. So we never recommend Tanzania to anybody. It is. That's why so many people like get caught up. It is. Zanzibar is technically an SAR. So because Zanzibar is an SAR, I suppose technically they could make their own laws that don't align with Dar es Salaam's rules. I don't know the charter though. I don't know like how deep their SAR is. But typically an SAR can make its own laws. So I suppose the island of Zanzibar could have its own thing going on, but it's an island, you know. So oh yeah. I hear you. Yeah, and I got friends that like love Stone Town and like love Arusha and all of that, but they've been put in a position now where like they employ. There's I got one guy who employs 300 Tanzanians, and so all of them are going to be unemployed now. They're all because he's not allowed to run that business anymore. So it just doesn't make sense. And you can tell like they have no idea how business works because like the government is like, oh, just sell it to a Tanzania. Yeah, like my suppliers don't have to do business with us. Like these are relationships that have been created over years, so I can't just plug somebody in and you expect that they're going to get the rates that I negotiated, or they're going to get the favor with suppliers who've never met them before that I get. Like that's not how business works. So you can tell it's very like young government doesn't know what it's doing situation. If I sold my company right now, they would literally lose every supplier deal that we have in China, because the Chinese do not deal with strangers. And as you can see from our social media, like we have traveled to China multiple times and negotiated our deals. So yeah, I could sell it, but they would lose every single deal that allows us to have the pricing that we have. So their pricing would triple overnight. The instant I sold it, they would, So it's not. It sounds good to people who have never done business before. Oh, yeah, just sell it. Just sell it then. It sounds great to people who have no idea how business works, but it just doesn't work that way. We saw that with when he kicked out the Indians, which I mean, looking at his mentality on it, I'm not even certain that I disagree with him. But the implementation of it was so naive that all he set up all of those Ugandans for failure. Not a single one of them still owns any of those businesses. Not one. Right? So not even 1%. It didn't even help 1%. So it's one of those things where it's like it sounds good if you've never been a business owner before and you don't know how business works until you do it and you realize that's not the way it works. So we'll We'll see. Maybe they'll grow up. It's a good part. They still have time. So we'll see what happens. All right. Anything else on any of this? Anything else on bonds, relocation? What do we got? What are your thoughts on investing in Senegal? It would depend on the investment. It would depend on the investment. Sierra Leone was a really nice place to invest in infrastructure. I heard someone talking about, was it Senegal? Was it like Burkina Faso or something? Somebody was talking about investing in like blockchain in a country that has zero blockchain infrastructure. And so it's like, all right, dude, you can almost invest in any country as long as you're investing in the right thing. But you gotta have like some common sense and some due diligence. You know what I mean? Even if you want to bring blockchain to the country that had no infrastructure, then you're investing in infrastructure, not in blockchain. You know what I mean? So it's just a matter of making sure that you've done your due diligence and you're investing in the right part of the, country that the investment can actually make an impact, right? So that local people actually get a positive impact from the investment. So if you invest in the wrong part of the chain or in the wrong thing in the wrong country, the local people won't get an impact from it at all. It'll go directly to like the country's version of billionaires or millionaires or whatever, who are building that infrastructure, but it'll never get to the people. What does that mean? It sounds like an emotional investment. Don't do that. Invest in the things that you know best. That's typically the advice I give, right? Invest in the things that you know best and you understand the best. And if it happens to be there, so be it. Do a little bit of due diligence. But if it's a thing that you know best, you'll understand the due diligence. If it's something that you don't know anything about, you won't even understand the due diligence. So at that point, you just hire an investment professional, right? Someone who's going to understand the due diligence. But, well, are they from there though? Because like I'm African American and I did like my DNA, but it's not West African. It's a tribe that used to exist on the border of Sudan and Egypt, called that are referred to as Balanta, and they currently live in West Africa, but that's not where they're from. Right? So you got to remember how the thing happened. You know what I'm saying? Just because, the tribe that you might have the DNA of, happens to be in West Africa now, that just means they were there when the Berlin Conference happened. That don't mean they're from there. You know what I mean? So you got to do a haplogroup test so you can see like what tribe, right? Because if you do a test that says, "Oh yeah, you're 60%, Nigerian, 60% Benin's, 60% Togo," that's the wrong test. You got to do a haplogroup test that tells you what people you're from, and then go research those people. You might be surprised. Like Kia from Traverse Culture, she actually has Kenyan, right? So, which was surprising, for her. I don't have a blood connection to Kenya in any way, shape, or form. But my people are not actually West African. I guess they would technically be East African because I have 100% haplogroup match, which is crazy. But I have 100% haplogroup match on my father's side to that tribe that originates from, Kush, but what would be the modern border of Egypt and Sudan. They currently live in Guinea-Bissau because that's where they were when the Berlin Conference happened, but that's not where they come from. So yeah, a lot of that, even like with relocation, like a lot of them that are doing like DNA relocation, it's just an emotional reaction because most of those people were nomadic, right? So like even if they're there now, that don't mean that's where they come from. I guess. I guess. Other than like foreheads, I don't know what that means. Cause I see a lot of Zulus that could be Igbo. You know what I mean? I don't know what looks like West means. But I mean, do your thing. Just make sure that you do it in something you understand. You know what I mean? It's just an investment. I just want to invest in the West. They just seem so that. Well, yeah. I mean, you got to find a structured investment. You can't like invest in something that's unstructured, right? So you want to find like a syndication where the investment money is held by an investment bank, and then the investment bank, issues the money to the fund managers and all of that. You know what I mean? Like that's how our stuff works. Like if you're with like Oak Special Fund, um, there's an investment bank that runs it. I'm trying to remember. I think it might be Stanbic or something. I can't even remember which one it is. I think FIDA Investment Bank is running the Mansa X fund. You know what I mean? So like, and that might be reversed. It might be Oak that's FIDA or whatever. But regardless, the point is that there are layers and it's structured. So the investment bank is holding the money and they're checking the balance from the fund manager who's deploying the money, and all of that. And then you can track everything. So just make sure it's, a structured investment, not some Yahoo in a Facebook group. That I don't know. Because, like, for example, in Nigeria, at least last time I checked, you can't engage in bonds directly like you can over here. So in Nigeria, you would have to pay like an investment banker. So you'd have to pay them their fee to engage in the bonds. And then they would, they might get a performance bonus. So they might actually get piece of the upside, depending on who you're dealing with. So it's a different setup. That doesn't mean it's not worth it per se, but it operates differently. So I don't know if there's any of them that operate like Kenya. But remember, when you're dealing with sovereign debt, treasury bonds, you're investing in the infrastructure of the country, not necessarily the people, right? So there's that as well. There are corporate bonds that are what they call investment class bonds. Like Safaricom has one in Kenya right now. I think it's actually done. I think they sold out. But they had one that was 10.4% ROI guaranteed for 5 years, tax free, because the purpose of the bond was to fund a green initiative. So because of that, Kenya gave them a tax free status on it. The government gave them a tax free status on it. So, but I think it's completely sold out. But it was 10.4% ROI, which obviously is less than like 14% that's available now, but it was tax exempt. So there's that. Not through us. None of our clients bought it through us, but I understand that some of them did buy it through their trustee. So the clients that are in a position to buy that, they typically have their trust fund already set up, and so when the people who buy it through us When the trust fund is set up, we put it in the trust fund. So when the trust fund goes to the trustee and they're the beneficiary of the trust, it's already in there making money, right? But beyond that, like once the trust is set up, then the trustee handles those things. Yeah, 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 totally. No, trusts that own all kinds of things. U.S. stocks, U.S. bonds. There are even the trusts that own property overseas. We don't typically recommend that, only because the property is physically in another jurisdiction. So even if the trust technically protects it, we've definitely seen situations where like judges judges will get frustrated by the fact that they can't do anything to the trust, and so they'll illegally seize the property. And then so the answer to that is the owner of the property needs to show up and say, this is an illegal seizure, release my property. The issue with that is that if the owner shows up, the owner has just now entered the judge's jurisdiction. So then they can hold the owner in contempt and like try to force something to happen. So we typically don't, typically the offshore trust will own the company. And in the US, it's typically an LLC that owns the property, and it's handled that way. Um, and then there's other little things that can be done, that I guess I won't get into. But there's things that make that type of seizure unattractive to the local jurisdictions. There's things you can do to the property that make that type of thing unattractive. So there's that. But yeah, typically we like the trusts to hold paper. So they hold stocks, they hold bonds, they hold shares, they hold intellectual property, they hold copyrights, they hold trademarks, they hold patents, things of that nature. Good, good, yeah. Now, the only cars that we're okay, we still even don't even really recommend cars, period. But the only ones that we're like kind of okay with are like antique cars that never drive on the road that you take for like road show to road show. That one we're kind of okay with. Outside of that, if you get into a car accident with a car that's owned by the trust, the person you hit can get everything inside your trust. Why would you, So typically not cars. Listen, I've been giving information out there for a long time, vibes. I can count on one hand how many people do anything with it. It's the same reason why people write books and tell everything in the book, and the book is only $5. And you're like, what? All this stuff is in this book, and they'll read the book, be like, yeah, I know how to do it, and never do it. All right. Well, it has been 2 hours and 56 minutes. Any other questions on any of this stuff before I call it? If not, it's time to take my son swimming. If you're writing something, throw a one in the chat. I will wait for you, or just hit enter and throw your garbled half a message in the chat, and I'll wait for you to fix it. If not, then I guess we are good. Take your time. I'll wait for you. If you finished your thought, TikTok blocked it, so change a word in it or whatever. But if you're still writing, that's fine. I'll wait. Do I have an email subscription? Kind of. We're playing with a Patreon. The point of the Patreon is to give people who are serious direct information on deals that are available that they can get into right away. So the Patreon, it's like, set up that like you can come in, you can pay your like a monthly subscription, which shows your seriousness. And then what I'll do is I'll drop like, hey, we got like there's going to be a 138-acre development project coming up that people can invest in. It's going to be really, really big. And so that's the kind of stuff that gets dropped in that Patreon community. But it's one of those things that like those investments need to be moved on. And so like just having like a mental banter with somebody about it is an utter waste of time. So we set it up so that people do have to pay to be in that community, so we know that those people are like legitimately serious. And then essentially what that payment is going to become a fund. So once that fund has X amount of dollars in it, the fund will start going out doing deals, and then those people of course will be able to get in on those and have preferential treatment to get in on those deals. So that's the closest thing to like an email subscription we have. We do have email lists as a business, but we don't send out like periodic stuff. We send out like email blasts when something crazy is happening, but we don't blow up, people's inboxes. So there is that. So if you want to do that in Patreon, it's called the Kenyan Deal Room. It's very, very new. And it kind of just comes out of the like put up or shut up school of thought, because there's been a lot of people like, I want to, I'm so tired of TikTok and I just want to do it. Everybody talks about it. Nobody does it, blah, 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 blah. And so that was our answer to that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just send us an email. Like the email that's in the profile here. Just send us an email that says add me to your email list, and then we'll put you on the email list and we'll let you know like which bonds are available. So we send that one out like once a month. So yeah, any of the wait, which lives are yes, any of the lives that are running right now are all business lives. If you watch on fan base, we don't have a business account on fan base. Oh no, it's back. Message if you and yeah, tomorrow at the same time. It's every tomorrow at the same time. It's every day this time. All right, I'll see you guys tomorrow.